Hello, everybody, and welcome back to King's Advisors. Today, we're going to be talking about some of the pretty big James Bond news that has come down the pipe in the last couple days. The first thing we're going to talk about is this news that Christopher Nolan is possibly going to be directing some James Bond movies soon, and what that means, story-wise, actor-wise. What does that mean? Who will play James Bond? What will James Bond look like? And then we're going to talk a little bit about who we'd like to see play James Bond. Now, as I've said in the past, I'm a really big James Bond guy. I really like the stories. Obviously, the last couple movies have been not as great as they have in the past. So this this news about Nolan definitely excites me. I'm going to share this article for a second here. It's from Yahoo News. Um, Rumors of Christopher Nolan potentially being tapped to direct future 007 movies continue to heat up. So, what's the latest Nolan Bond rumors? So, according to this report from some inside forum thing, Nolan is apparently in talks to potentially direct two Bond films, and the director would write both of them as well. Now, that's interesting. I like that. Um, However, apparently the main sticking point and the reason this hasn't really gone further than conversations is Amazon and Eon and Nolan are at odds over how much creative freedom Nolan actually will have for these movies. This article goes on to say that Eon and Amazon want to do a full reboot of the modern era of Bond, while Nolan would rather make period accurate versions of Fleming's novels. Now, if you don't know, a lot of the movies actually take their names from the names of Fleming's novels. Casino Royale, it was the first one ever written. Live and Let Die, From Russia with Love, Moonraker, Dr. No. Dr. No was the first movie. Diamonds Are Forever, Goldfinger, For Your Eyes Only, Thunderball, You Only Live Twice, The Spy Who Loved Me, Under Her Majesty's Secret Service, The Man with the Golden God, and Octopussy and the Living Daylights. Now, I've read 8 of the 14 books, I believe, and it's been a while since I've read them, but I do remember that the movies they differ quite a bit from the books. They're not, book accurate, but that's because at the end of the day, what you need for a James Bond movie isn't to put what Ian wrote in the book on film. You need a good spy story. Now, some people will argue, okay, so if you don't need to put what Ian wrote on paper on film, then why do you care who 007 is? And that's because the reason you read the books was because of 007. And the reason you watch the movies is because of 007. 007 and James Bond are the important aspect of the movies, and they need to remain the same. Otherwise, they're not a 007 movie. So, looking at what apparently is the issue here, that Nolan would rather make film adaptations of Ian Fleming's novels in period settings. Now, the question would be, is the real issue that probably means Ian wants to cast a white guy as James Bond? I think it probably does. I think Amazon, because we know now that Amazon has these DEI rules. And while Disney appears to kind of be going away from it, um, Amazon is full steam ahead with that shit. So I think Amazon has a problem with not being able to have a alphabet, non-white, non-male character in the lead role. That's what I think Amazon's problem is here. The cool thing is, according to this insider, the goal is to get Nolan to do 2 or 3 of the films and then have him executive produce going forward, which means he would be someone that could sit there and say, no, that's not the right person for the job, or no, I want to see it go this way. We don't know. We actually won't know if this is a good thing until we see the first movies. Now, the big problem with this, obviously, is let's look at Nolan's list here. Here's the list of movies, and let me zoom in a bit. And so I want to look at Batman Begins, The Dark Knight, and The Dark Knight Rises. So we have 7 years between the first and last of these movies. So 7 years, 3 movies over 7 years. That's not too bad. When you think about how Star Wars started, you had 3 movies over 9 years. And even when the prequels came out, it was 3 movies over 6 years. So, 3 Bond movies in 7 years, that'd be pretty good. If I recall correctly, that would be about average. The problem becomes, who do we want to play James Bond? Well, I have been a long-standing proponent of getting Henry Cavill as James Bond. The only problem with Cavill is 40 years old, which means if they started doing this movie today, it's unlikely it would be done before he was 42. I mean, that's not crazy. 42 years old. I mean, let's look at how old Daniel Craig is. 55 years old right now, which means he was 53 when he did No Time to Die. Well, that's not crazy. He would have been, I think, 38 when Casino Royale came out. So being 2 years younger, I think Cavill could do it. Cavill's in really good shape. The only problem that Cavill possesses is Cavill's a big guy. And James Bond needs to not be James Bond can't stand out. You've got a bunch of other villains in James Bond stories that have bodyguards and they stand out. They're the big guy. Cavill hasn't always been a really big guy. He had a role in Tudors down here where he wasn't a very large guy. And I think if we could get, and even in Enola Holmes, he doesn't appear to be a rather large guy in that. It's just the fact that he buffed up for Man of Steel, Mission Impossible, and The Witcher. I think our best guess to what a Cavill James Bond could look like is going to be this movie, Argyle. I watched the trailer last night. I'm not overly impressed. It's an interesting concept. There's interesting stuff in it, but I think it's the kind of movie that it's going to make $400 or $500 million, but it's not going to be anything big. And actually, that depends on whether or not it's actually distributed in theaters because it's an Apple TV product, so it might just be on Apple TV. But that's neither here nor there. So I like the idea of Nolan directing a movie. I like the idea that Nolan could control what's going on the screen. We know he's a very good storyteller. We know that he understands these kind of heroic individuals. When you think back to The Dark Knight, that's one of the greatest movies we've seen. It's probably in the top 10 movies of the 21st century. So I think he could do this. The only issue I would have is, Tenet was kind of bleh. Dunkirk, while I really enjoyed it, there's not enough story in it. There's not enough dialogue. And if you're a fan of Operation Dynamo, then it's fine. It's a great movie. I really enjoyed it. And the story about them going to watch the movie with Dunkirk vets is incredible, and I love it. But I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the concerns that I might have for a Nolan movie. Now, what I will say is I do think Nolan's best work, both directing and writing, is The Prestige. And if we could get a Bond movie that has you on the edge of your seat that entire time, had the action of Dark Knight, had the character development of Dark Knight, I think we could see the greatest James Bond movie of all time. The issue becomes with the casting. So if we can see Nolan having a considerable amount of control over his movie and they can cast a good James Bond, I think they got a shot with this. Everybody, thank you so much for watching. What are your thoughts about a Nolan James Bond movie? Who do you think, this is the big question of the day. Who do you think should play James Bond and why? I need to know why you think that character should play James Bond. Because that actor should play James Bond. Because it is such an important role that if you can't get it right, there are movies out there where a lot of people could have played that character. It's very hard to pick a person that can play James Bond because not only do they have to look a certain way, but they have to have a certain demeanor. And if they can't fake that demeanor, then you failed in the movie already. So like I said, comment below who you think should play James Bond. Don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Twitter at KingsAdvisors_.